The night everything changed. The fluorescent lights of Boston General Hospital hummed their eternal song. It was 3 in the morning on a humid August night, and the emergency room buzzed with the controlled chaos that Dr. Rachel Bennett had learned to navigate like a dancer moving through a crowded floor. At 28, she had already earned a reputation among the nursing staff as someone who never lost her cool, never raised her voice, and never let anything slip through the cracks. Tonight, she was treating her 7th patient since her shift began at midnight. An elderly woman with chest pains sat in Bay 4, stabilized but anxious. A teenager with a badly sprained ankle waited for X-ray results in Bay 2. The triage nurse had just brought back a construction worker with a deep laceration that would need stitches. Rachel moved between them all with efficient grace, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her blue scrubs showing the wrinkles of a long shift. The arrival of James Donovan. The automatic doors burst open with more force than necessary. Rachel glanced up from the tablet where she was reviewing lab results. A tall man in an expensive suit strode through, one hand pressed against his chest, his face contorted in what might have been pain or anger or both. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. His watch caught the fluorescent light and glinted with the unmistakable gleam of something that cost more than most people made in a year. "I need a doctor," he announced, not to the triage nurse but to the room at large. His voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "Now. I'm having chest pains." Rachel watched as Nurse Patricia Martinez, a veteran of 30 years in emergency medicine, approached him with her clipboard. "Sir, if you'll just come to the triage window, I'll get your information and assess your urgency level." "I don't have time for triage." The man brushed past Patricia and walked straight toward the main nursing station. "Do you know who I am?" "I'm James Donovan. I run Donovan Pharmaceuticals. I need to see a cardiologist immediately." Rachel takes control. Rachel set down her tablet and stepped into his path. She was not a tall woman, barely reaching 5'4" in her sneakers, but she had learned early in medical school that authority had nothing to do with physical size. She planted herself directly in front of James Donovan and met his eyes with a level stare. "Sir, I'm Dr. Bennett. I'm the attending physician on duty tonight." Her voice was calm, clear, and carried just enough edge to cut through his bluster. "I understand you're experiencing discomfort, but in this emergency room, every patient follows the same protocol. You will go to triage, you will have your vital signs assessed, and you will be seen in order of medical urgency." James stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "You don't understand. I could be having a heart attack. And so could the woman in Bay 4, who has been waiting patiently for the past hour," Rachel replied without raising her voice. "That's exactly why we have triage. To determine who needs to be seen first based on medical need, not based on who makes the most noise or has the most impressive job title." The public confrontation. A hush had fallen over the emergency room. The other patients who were well enough to pay attention watched the scene unfold. Patricia stood frozen with her clipboard. Even the young resident who had been suturing a wound in Bay 6 had paused to look. James Donovan's face flushed red. "I donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to this hospital every year. And we appreciate that," Rachel said, still in that same calm, clinical tone. "But your donations don't change the fact that you're currently standing in an emergency room, refusing to follow basic medical protocol, and disrupting the care of other patients. So here are your options, Mr. Donovan. You can walk over to the triage window right now, let Nurse Martinez do her job, and be seen when it's medically appropriate. Or you can leave and seek care elsewhere. But what you cannot do is bully your way past everyone else who got here before you." For a long moment, James simply stared at her. Rachel could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was a man who was used to getting his way through force of personality, through money, through sheer will. But here, in her emergency room, none of that mattered. The unexpected surrender. Something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was the pain in his chest intensifying. Maybe it was the realization that everyone in the room was now watching him, judging him. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first time in years that someone had treated him like a regular human being instead of someone special. "Fine," he said quietly. The bluster had drained out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He turned and walked slowly toward the triage window where Patricia waited. Rachel watched him go, then returned her attention to her tablet. Her heart was pounding harder than she liked to admit, but her hands were steady. She finished reviewing the lab results for her elderly patient in Bay 4, then made her way over to check on her. 20 minutes later, after Patricia had completed his triage assessment, James Donovan was assigned to Bay 7. His blood pressure was elevated, his pulse was rapid, but his EKG showed no signs of acute cardiac distress. Rachel reviewed his chart before stepping through the curtain to examine him. The first real conversation. He sat on the examination table, his expensive suit jacket folded neatly beside him, his tie loosened. He looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable in the thin hospital gown. When Rachel entered, he met her eyes with something that might have been embarrassment. "I apologize," he said before she could speak. "For my behavior earlier. That was inappropriate." Rachel nodded, pulling on her stethoscope. "Thank you. Now, tell me about these chest pains. When did they start?" As she examined him, asking questions about his symptoms, his medical history, his lifestyle, a different picture began to emerge. James Donovan worked 16-hour days. He ate most of his meals at his desk or in business meetings. He couldn't remember the last time he had taken a vacation. The chest pains had been coming and going for weeks, but this was the first time he had been scared enough to seek help. "Your EKG is normal," Rachel told him after completing her examination. "Your cardiac enzymes will take about an hour to come back, but I don't see any signs of an acute heart attack. Based on your description in my examination, I believe you're experiencing anxiety-related chest pain, possibly complicated by acid reflux from stress and poor eating habits." The prescription that changed everything. James looked relieved and annoyed at the same time. "So there's nothing wrong with me?" "I didn't say that," Rachel replied, pulling out her prescription pad. But instead of writing a medication, she wrote 2 words in clear, firm handwriting: "Slow down." She handed him the paper. "That's my prescription, Mr. Donovan. Your body is sending you a message, and tonight it decided to deliver that message loudly enough that you couldn't ignore it anymore. You're not having a heart attack today, but if you continue at this pace, you might be back here in a year or 5 years with something much more serious." James stared at the prescription, a strange expression crossing his face. "You're serious. Completely serious. I'm going to refer you to a cardiologist for follow-up, and I strongly recommend you also see your primary care physician about stress management. But the real treatment isn't something I can prescribe. It's something you have to choose for yourself." The lingering impact. As Rachel left Bay 7 to check on her other patients, she thought that would be the end of James Donovan. Just another patient who passed through her emergency room, received treatment, and moved on with their life. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, he would return for his follow-up appointment. She had no way of knowing that this abrasive, arrogant man would become the most challenging and ultimately the most important person she would ever meet. For now, the emergency room called. There were patients to treat, lives to save, and a long shift still ahead. Rachel Bennett moved on to the next bay, the next chart, the next person who needed her help. But something had shifted in the air that night, a change so subtle that she wouldn't recognize it for weeks to come. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights continued their eternal hum, and life went on, patient by patient, moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat. The return visit. 3 days after their first encounter, Rachel was reviewing patient charts in the hospital's cardiology clinic when she saw a familiar name on her afternoon schedule. James Donovan. She paused, her pen hovering over the paperwork. The cardiology department had asked her to sit in on some follow-up cases as part of a new collaborative care program. She had not expected one of those cases to be him. When he walked into the examination room, he looked different. Gone was the aggressive posture and the fury in his eyes. He wore casual clothes, a button-down shirt and khakis, and he actually smiled when he saw her. "Dr. Bennett. I was hoping I might see you here," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Mr. Donovan. How have you been feeling since your emergency room visit?" Rachel kept her tone professional, clinical. She pulled up his test results on her computer screen. The cardiac enzyme tests had all come back normal. The cardiologist's notes indicated no underlying heart disease. "Better, actually," James admitted. "I took your advice." "Well, some of it. I've been leaving the office by 7 instead of midnight. I've been eating real meals instead of protein bars at my desk. And I haven't had any more chest pains." Rachel nodded, making notes in his file. "That's good progress. The cardiologist wants to see you back in 3 months for a follow-up stress test, but everything looks positive right now." An unexpected offer. James leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Dr. Bennett, I want to talk to you about something unrelated to my health." "Well, related to health in general, but not mine specifically." Rachel looked up from her computer, curious despite herself. "My company, Donovan Pharmaceuticals, is in the final stages of developing a new cardiac medication. It's called Heart Shield. It's designed to prevent secondary heart attacks in patients who have already had one. The clinical trials have been very promising. We're preparing to submit for approval next month." "Congratulations," Rachel said, wondering where this was going. "We need an independent medical consultant to review our clinical trial data before submission. Someone with no connection to the company, someone who can look at the data with fresh eyes and tell us if we've missed anything. I'd like to offer you that position." Rachel sat back in her chair, genuinely surprised. "Mr. Donovan, I'm an emergency room physician, not a clinical researcher." "Exactly. You see patients in crisis. You make life and death decisions based on incomplete information in high-pressure situations. That's the perspective we need. Someone who understands what happens in the real world, not just in controlled studies." He named a consulting fee that made Rachel's eyes widen. "I need to think about it," she said carefully. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Dr. Bennett, I meant what I said in my apology. You were right that night. I was acting like the rules didn't apply to me. This is my way of proving that I've learned something. I want the best medical eyes on this data, even if they find problems I don't want to hear about. The data that didn't add up." 2 weeks later, Rachel found herself in a conference room at Donovan Pharmaceuticals, surrounded by binders full of clinical trial data. She had agreed to the consulting position, partly because the money would help pay off her medical school loans, but mostly because she was genuinely curious about the drug. For the first 3 days, everything looked impressive. Heart Shield had performed well in trials. The side effect profile was minimal. The efficacy rates were strong. But on the 4th day, as Rachel was digging through the supplementary data from one of the trial sites, she noticed something odd. There was a cluster of patients who had been withdrawn from the study early. The official reason given was non-compliance with protocol, but when Rachel looked at their preliminary data, she saw a pattern. 5 patients, all in the same age group, all with similar medical histories, had shown unusual liver enzyme elevations within the first month of taking Heart Shield. Rachel spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing data, making charts, running statistical analyses. By the time James knocked on the conference room door that evening, she had filled a whiteboard with notes. "Still here?" he asked, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. "I thought you'd have gone home hours ago." "I found something," Rachel said without preamble. She walked him through her analysis, showing him the pattern she had discovered. These 5 patients were all removed from the trial and labeled as non-compliant. But look at their data before they were removed. The liver enzyme elevations aren't dramatic, but they're consistent. And if I'm reading the timeline correctly, all 5 patients were removed within days of these tests being run. James studied the whiteboard, his expression unreadable. The investigators on site made the determination that these patients weren't following the protocol correctly. That's standard practice in clinical trials. But did anyone follow up with these patients? Did anyone check their liver function after they stopped taking the drug? Did anyone look for other patients who might have shown similar patterns but weren't tested at the right time? Rachel, we have hundreds of patients in these trials across multiple sites. We can't chase down every minor irregularity. It was the first time he had used her first name. She noticed but chose to ignore it. This isn't a minor irregularity, James. This is a potential safety signal that got buried under a label of non-compliance. If even a small percentage of patients taking this drug long-term develop liver problems, you're not just looking at a failed drug approval. You're looking at people getting hurt. The clash of perspectives. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. James set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. We have been working on Heart Shield for 7 years. We've invested over $300 million. We have data from over 2,000 patients showing that this drug saves lives. And you want me to halt everything because 5 patients had some elevated lab values? I want you to investigate, Rachel said firmly. I want you to find those 5 patients and test their liver function now. I want you to review every other patient in the trial and look for similar patterns that might have been missed. I want you to be absolutely certain that this drug is safe before you ask the authorities to approve it. We're scheduled to submit in 3 weeks. If I delay now, we lose our priority review status. Our competitors will get to market first. The company's stock price will tank. I have investors, employees, obligations. Rachel crossed her arms. And I have an obligation to patients. That's why you hired me, remember? To give you an independent medical perspective. Well, here it is. This data raises red flags. You need to address them before moving forward. James ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she was beginning to recognize. You're asking me to risk everything based on a hunch. I'm asking you to put patient safety above profit. I thought that was the whole point of medicine. They stared at each other across the conference room table, 2 people who had just realized they were standing on opposite sides of a chasm. The emergency that changed everything. The argument was interrupted by James's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. I have to take this. Rachel watched as he stepped into the hallway. She could hear his voice through the door, rising in alarm. When he came back into the room 2 minutes later, he looked shaken. That was the hospital. My father just collapsed. They think it's a heart attack. I need to go. I'll drive you, Rachel said immediately, grabbing her bag. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. You're in no condition to drive, and I know every shortcut to Boston General. They made the 20-minute drive in silence. Rachel navigated through traffic with practiced efficiency while James sat rigid in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists. She could see him struggling to maintain control, and something in her chest tightened with unexpected sympathy. When they arrived at the emergency room, the same emergency room where they had first met, Rachel led him straight to the triage desk. Patricia was on duty again and recognized them both immediately. Dr. Bennett. Mr. Donovan. Your father is in Bay 3. Dr. Harrison is with him now. Rachel stayed close as James rushed to his father's bedside. The older man was conscious but clearly in pain, hooked up to monitors and oxygen. Dr. Harrison, one of Rachel's colleagues, looked up as they entered. James. Your father had a myocardial infarction. We've stabilized him, and we're preparing to take him to the cardiac catheterization lab. He'll need a stent placement, possibly more than one. The next few hours are critical. A moment of truth. Rachel watched James take his father's hand. The older man, who shared his son's strong features but softened by age, managed a weak smile. Always making a scene, he whispered. "Don't talk, Dad. Save your energy. I need to tell you something." His father's voice was faint but insistent. "That drug you're working on. I know you've put everything into it. But your mother, God rest her soul, she always said the same thing. Do right by people first. The money figures itself out later." James's jaw tightened. He looked at Rachel, then back at his father. "I'm going to, Dad. I promise." They wheeled his father away to the cardiac lab. James stood in the empty bay, surrounded by the beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, looking lost. Rachel touched his arm gently. "He's in good hands. Dr. Harrison is one of the best interventional cardiologists in the state." "My mother died of a heart attack 10 years ago," James said quietly. "That's why I started focusing Donovan Pharmaceuticals on cardiac medications. I thought if I could help prevent what happened to her from happening to other people, it would mean something. It would matter." Rachel understood then. The drive, the pressure, the reluctance to see problems with Heart Shield. It wasn't just about money or success. It was about trying to fix something that could never truly be fixed. "It does matter," she said softly. "But it matters more if you do it right. Your father just reminded you of that." The long night. They spent the next 4 hours in the surgical waiting room. James paced. Rachel made phone calls to postpone her shift. They drank terrible coffee from the vending machine. They didn't talk much, but there was a new understanding between them, forged in the shared anxiety of waiting. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged, still in his surgical scrubs, both of them jumped to their feet. "The procedure went well. We placed 2 stents. His heart function is better than expected. He's going to need cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle changes, but with proper medication and follow-up, his prognosis is good." The relief on James's face was profound. He shook Dr. Harrison's hand with both of his own. "Thank you. Thank you so much." After the surgeon left, James turned to Rachel. "The medication Dr. Harrison mentioned. One of them will be a drug to prevent future heart attacks. Maybe it will be Heart Shield someday, if we do this right. If we make sure it's truly safe." "I'll help you," Rachel said. "We'll go back through all the data. We'll track down those 5 patients. We'll do whatever it takes to be certain." James nodded slowly. "You know, that night in the emergency room when you made me wait in line like everyone else? I hated you for it. I thought you were being petty and vindictive. And now? Now I think you might have saved my life. Not medically, but in every other way that matters. You reminded me what rules are for. What medicine is supposed to be about." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Thank you, Rachel. For tonight, for the hard questions, for all of it." It was nearly dawn when Rachel finally left the hospital. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Boston, she thought about James sitting by his father's bedside, about the data waiting in that conference room, about the choice they would have to make together. This partnership she had entered into as a consulting job had become something much more complicated. She had no way of knowing that the complications were only beginning. The investigation begins. The morning after his father's heart attack, James called an emergency meeting with his executive team at Donovan Pharmaceuticals. Rachel sat in on the meeting via video conference, watching as James explained that they were delaying the Heart Shield submission to conduct additional safety analysis. The reaction was explosive. The chief financial officer warned about stock price impacts. The head of research insisted that the data was solid. The lead investigator from the clinical trials defended the decision to remove those 5 patients from the study. They weren't following the dosing schedule correctly, Dr. Phillips insisted, his face red on the video screen. Standard practice is to remove non-compliant patients to avoid contaminating the data. Then you won't mind if we contact them and verify that, Rachel said calmly. And while we're at it, we should review liver function tests for every patient in the trial, not just the ones who were tested as part of the protocol. That will take weeks, the CFO protested. Then it takes weeks, James said with finality. We're not submitting until we're certain this drug is safe. Meeting adjourned. After everyone else logged off, James stayed on the call with Rachel. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed from the sleepless night at the hospital. Thank you for backing me up, he said. I'm just doing my job. How's your father? Awake and complaining about the hospital food, which the nurses tell me is a good sign. A small smile crossed his face. He asked about you. I told him you were the one who wouldn't let me cut in line. What did he say? He laughed and said he liked you already. The discovery. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel and a small team of researchers worked around the clock reviewing data. They tracked down 4 of the 5 patients who had been removed from the study. All 4 agreed to new blood tests. All 4 still showed elevated liver enzymes, months after stopping Heart Shield. The 5th patient was harder to find. He had moved and changed phone numbers. But when they finally located him through his former primary care physician, the news was worse. He had been hospitalized 3 months earlier with acute liver failure. He had survived, but just barely, and would need monitoring for the rest of his life. Rachel sat in the conference room at Donovan Pharmaceuticals, staring at the test results spread across the table. James stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city skyline. We have to report this, Rachel said quietly. Not just to the authorities. We need to notify every patient who's currently taking Heart Shield in ongoing studies. We need to shut down the trials immediately. I know. His voice was hollow. Do you understand what this means? 7 years of work. $300 million. All of it gone. And worse than that, we put people at risk. That patient who had liver failure, he could have died. He almost did die. But he didn't. And now no one else will be hurt because we're stopping this before it goes any further. James turned to face her. In the 2 weeks they had been working together, something had shifted between them. The late nights reviewing data, the shared meals of takeout food eaten over spreadsheets, the moments of frustration and discovery had created a bond that neither of them had expected or intended. Rachel, I need to tell you something, James said, crossing the room to stand in front of her. These past few weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it's made me realize something. You're the most brilliant, principled, frustrating person I've ever met. And I think I'm falling in love with you. The impossible situation. Rachel stood up abruptly, putting distance between them. James, you can't say that. Not now. Not in the middle of all this. Why not? Because it's inconvenient? Because it complicates things? He followed her across the room. Everything about us has been complicated from the beginning. That doesn't make it less real. I'm your consultant. I'm the person who just destroyed your company's most important project. You're not in love with me. You're just dealing with stress and trauma and your father's illness, and I'm the person who happens to be here. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. His voice was firm but not angry. I know the difference between gratitude and love. I know the difference between convenience and connection. Do you honestly think I would say this if I wasn't certain? Rachel turned to face him, her heart pounding. Even if what you're feeling is real, it doesn't matter. I have a job to do. I have to report these findings. Your company is going to face investigations, lawsuits, financial ruin. And I'm going to be the one who triggered all of that. How can you possibly want to be with someone who's about to tear down everything you built? Because you're doing the right thing. Because patient safety matters more than my ego or my company's stock price. Because you're teaching me what it means to have real integrity. He reached out and gently took her hand. Rachel, I'm not asking you to compromise your principles. I would never ask that. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, after all this is over, there could be an us. The moment of crisis. Before Rachel could respond, James's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face went white. It's the hospital. About my father. He answered on speaker. The doctor's voice was grave. Mr. Donovan, your father has developed a complication. He's having another cardiac event. We need you here immediately. They raced to the hospital together for the second time in 2 weeks. This time, the news was worse. James's father had developed a severe arrhythmia. His heart was failing. The doctors had him stabilized for the moment, but his condition was critical. Rachel stood outside the cardiac intensive care unit, watching through the glass as James sat by his father's bedside. The older man was unconscious now, kept alive by machines and medications. She saw James holding his father's hand, saw his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and her own eyes filled with tears. Dr. Harrison found her in the hallway. We're doing everything we can, but Rachel, you should prepare him. His father's heart has sustained too much damage. Even with all our interventions, I don't think he has more than a few days. Rachel nodded, unable to speak. After Dr. Harrison left, she went into the room and stood beside James. He looked up at her with devastated eyes. He's dying, James said. It wasn't a question. I'm so sorry. After my mother died, he was the one who held everything together. He taught me how to run the business. He believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. James's voice broke. I don't know how to do this without him. Rachel sat down beside him and took his other hand. You're not going to do it without him. Everything he taught you, everything he believed about doing right by people, that stays with you. That becomes part of who you are. The final choice. James's father died 2 days later, peacefully, with his son holding his hand. The funeral was held on a gray October morning. Rachel attended, standing in the back of the church, watching as James delivered a eulogy about a man who valued integrity above all else. After the service, James found her in the cemetery. Thank you for coming. Of course. I'm so sorry for your loss. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by headstones and falling leaves. Finally, James spoke. I've made a decision about Heart Shield. We're not just halting the trials. We're abandoning the drug entirely. The liver toxicity issue is too significant to overcome. We're going to notify all the patients, compensate anyone who was harmed, and be completely transparent about what we found and why we're stopping. That's the right decision, Rachel said softly. It's also going to bankrupt the company. My board is already calling for my resignation. Our stock price has dropped 40% since the news started leaking. But my father was right. You do right by people first, and the rest figures itself out. What will you do? Rebuild. Not Donovan Pharmaceuticals, something new. Something built on the right foundation from the start. It might take years, but I have time. He turned to face her fully. Rachel, I meant what I said in the conference room. I'm in love with you. I understand if you don't feel the same way. I understand if this whole situation has made that impossible. But I needed you to know. Rachel looked at this man who had started as her most difficult patient and become something she never expected. She thought about the arrogant executive who had burst into her emergency room demanding special treatment. She thought about the son sitting by his dying father's bedside. She thought about the CEO who chose integrity over profit even when it cost him everything. James, I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm terrified of what it means to care about you. I'm terrified of how quickly this happened. I'm terrified that we're going to hurt each other. I'm terrified too, he said. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been. The new beginning. Rachel stepped closer to him. I don't know if this is smart. I don't know if this will work. But yes, James. After all this is over, after the investigations and the lawsuits and everything else that's coming, yes. I want to try. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight in the gray morning light. Around them, life went on. Cars passed on the nearby road. Birds sang in the trees. The world continued its eternal turning. 6 months later, Rachel stood in a different conference room in a different building. James had started a new company, this one focused on medical device safety consulting. It was smaller than Donovan Pharmaceuticals, less glamorous, but built on a foundation of the principles his father had taught him. Rachel had left her consulting position but remained at Boston General Hospital, where she had recently been promoted to lead the emergency department's quality improvement program. She and James saw each other when they could, building something real and lasting one day at a time. On this particular morning, Rachel was presenting to a group of pharmaceutical executives about the importance of independent medical review in clinical trials. She spoke about the Heart Shield case, about the 5 patients whose liver problems had been dismissed, about the choice between speed to market and patient safety. In the audience, James sat and watched her speak, his eyes filled with pride and love. She met his gaze and smiled, remembering the night he had burst into her emergency room demanding immediate attention, remembering how she had made him wait in line like everyone else. That moment of confrontation had started everything. It had taught him humility, taught her compassion, and brought them together in the most unexpected way. Sometimes the most important relationships in life begin not with romance but with someone caring enough to tell you the hard truth you need to hear. As Rachel finished her presentation to enthusiastic applause, James stood and joined her at the front of the room. Together, they had learned that doing the right thing often costs everything. But they had also learned that integrity, like love, is something you build one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And that was a lesson worth every price they had paid.